The morning light filtered through the dusty workshop windows, casting long shadows across Michael's carefully arranged workspace. Each tool had a story, a history that extended far beyond its monetary value. The vintage hand planes, a set of Bailey No. 4 and No. 5 models, had belonged to his grandfather, Carlos Reyes, a master carpenter who had immigrated from Mexico in the 1950s. They were more than just tools. They were a connection to his family's legacy, each nick and patina telling a story of craftsmanship passed down through generations. Michael remembered the day his grandfather had first placed those planes in his hands. These are not just tools, Carlos had said, his weathered hands guiding Michael's smaller fingers along the smooth wooden bodies. These are an extension of your soul, your connection to every piece of wood you'll ever touch. Now the empty spaces on the pegboard felt like gaping wounds, each missing tool a personal betrayal. The discovery had been gradual. First, Michael noticed the missing chisels, a set of Japanese white steel blades he'd saved for months to purchase. They were razor-sharp, with handles carefully wrapped in traditional blue silk. Then the precision-measuring tools vanished, micrometers that could measure to the thousandth of an inch, tools that separated a true craftsman from an amateur. He began to reconstruct the theft meticulously. Michael was nothing if not methodical. The workshop's security wasn't elaborate, but it was careful, a simple padlock, windows that were typically closed and locked. The scratch on the windowsill was his first real clue. It matched a distinctive gouge on Elena's cheap metal garden trellis, a piece of yard decor that looked like it had been assembled by someone with more enthusiasm than skill. When he first confronted Elena, her response was a masterclass in deflection. She stood on her side of the property line, hands on her hips, a look of practiced indignation on her face. "Are you seriously accusing me of stealing?" she had demanded, her voice rising. "I don't even know how to use those fancy tools of yours." But Michael had seen something in her eyes, a flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? It was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a veneer of aggressive defensiveness. He began to gather evidence quietly. Michael knew that accusation without proof would only make him look foolish. He reached out to a friend who worked in local security, asking about camera footage from nearby properties. He documented the empty spaces in his workshop, taking careful photographs and creating a detailed inventory of the missing items. The local police were sympathetic but cautious. "We need more than a circumstantial scratch and your suspicion," the responding officer had told him. "Do you have any actual proof she took the tools?" Michael's reputation in the community worked against him in this instance. He was known as a level-headed craftsman, not someone prone to wild accusations. Elena, despite her abrasive personality, had no prior criminal record. To most, it would seem like a dispute between difficult neighbors rather than a clear-cut case of theft. But Michael knew. The feeling was visceral, a certainty that burned in his gut. Those tools, his grandfather's legacy, were gone and Elena was responsible. He just needed to prove it. As days passed, the theft became more than just a material loss. It was a violation of trust, a destruction of the unspoken community bond that should exist between neighbors. Michael found himself changing, his normally calm demeanor giving way to a slow-burning determination. He would recover his tools. He would find the truth. Little did he know how that determination would transform both his and Elena's lives in ways neither could have anticipated. The next 2 weeks became a crucible of frustration for Michael Reyes. His workshop, once a sanctuary of creativity and precision, now felt like a crime scene under investigation. Every surface was covered with notes, printed security camera stills, and meticulously organized documentation of the theft. His current woodworking project, a custom-built cherry wood dining table for a high-end client, began to suffer. Normally, Michael could create intricate dovetail joints with the precision of a surgeon, his hands moving with muscle memory developed over decades. Now, his concentration fractured, he found himself making uncharacteristic mistakes. The perfectly aligned joint would suddenly be off by a millimeter, a tiny error that would force him to discard an expensive piece of wood. The local woodworking community noticed the change. Jack Peterson, who ran the monthly craftsman's meetup, pulled Michael aside during their weekly gathering. "You're not yourself, Mike," he said, genuine concern etching his weathered face. "I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you this distracted." Michael knew Jack was right. His reputation was built on reliability and exceptional craftsmanship. Losing those tools was more than a material loss. It was threatening his professional identity. The vintage hand planes from his grandfather weren't just tools. They were a connection to his family's immigrant story, to generations of carpenters who had carved out a living through skill and determination. He decided to escalate his investigation. Using his network of contacts, Michael began to piece together a more comprehensive picture. A friend who worked for the local security camera installation company helped him obtain additional footage from nearby properties. Most cameras caught nothing unusual, but one grainy video from a traffic camera at the end of the street provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. The footage showed Alina's beat-up Honda Civic driving past his street late at night, just hours before the tools went missing. More importantly, the timestamp confirmed it was during the window of the suspected theft. When Michael approached the local police again, Detective Sandra Rodriguez listened more carefully this time. She was familiar with Michael's reputation, a respected local craftsman with no history of false accusations. "We'll need more," she explained, "but this is definitely something we can investigate further." The emotional toll was significant. Michael's wife, Maria, watched her husband transform. The man who had always been calm and methodical was now consumed by a mix of anger and determination. Their evening conversations became increasingly focused on the theft, with Michael recounting every detail, every potential scenario. "I'm not just angry about the tools," he confided to Maria one evening. "It's about respect. About someone thinking they can just walk into my space and take what isn't theirs." Maria understood. She had grown up in the same tight-knit community, where a person's word and reputation meant everything. The violation went beyond the physical theft. It was an assault on Michael's integrity, on the values his grandfather had instilled in him. As the investigation continued, Michael began to realize that proving the theft would require more than circumstantial evidence. He would need to be patient, methodical, and strategic. The tools were important, but maintaining his professional reputation was paramount. Little did he know that the path to resolution would be far more complex than simply recovering his grandfather's tools. The confrontation with Elena would change both of their lives in ways he could never have anticipated. The breaking point was approaching, a moment when frustration would transform into action, when the quiet determination of a skilled craftsman would meet the desperation of a neighbor pushed to her limits. The late autumn evening settled like a thick blanket over the quiet suburban street. Michael had meticulously prepared for this moment, installing additional security cameras and setting up a carefully orchestrated trap. He knew Alina's patterns. She typically came home late on Wednesday nights after her shift at the local community college, where she worked as an administrative assistant. His workshop became a carefully constructed stage for confrontation. Michael positioned himself strategically, having disabled the primary lock but left the workshop seemingly vulnerable. A motion-activated recorder was hidden behind a stack of carefully arranged lumber, capturing every sound and movement. The vintage tools, or rather, replicas designed to look identical, were strategically placed to attract attention. When Elena's distinctive Honda Civic pulled into her driveway, Michael's heart raced. Years of woodworking had taught him patience, but tonight, every muscle in his body was coiled with tension. He watched through a carefully positioned gap in the window blinds as she looked around, seemingly checking if anyone was watching. She moved with a practiced stealth that suggested this wasn't her first unauthorized entry. The way she approached the workshop window, the careful manner in which she tested the lock, it all spoke of premeditation. Michael felt a surge of vindication mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. The moment Elena slipped into the workshop, Michael made his move. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound that seemed to echo with finality. Elena spun around, her face a mix of shock and immediate defensive anger. "What the hell?" she screamed, rushing to the door. But Michael had already engaged the special lock he'd installed, a mechanism that would require a specific sequence to disengage. "We're going to talk," Michael said, his voice calm but laden with years of accumulated frustration. "No more running. No more lies." The workshop became a pressure cooker of emotion. Woodworking tools lined the walls, shadows cast by the single overhead light creating an almost interrogation-like atmosphere. Elena's bravado began to crack almost immediately. She alternated between aggressive denials and nervous fidgeting, her eyes darting around the workshop. Michael had prepared meticulously. Printed photographs were laid out on his workbench, security camera stills, timestamps, a detailed inventory of the stolen tools. Each piece of evidence was arranged with the same precision he used in his woodworking, creating an irrefutable narrative. "I know about the financial troubles," Michael said quietly, watching Elena's face pale. "The overdue bills, the collection notices." It was a calculated statement, one he confirmed through careful investigation. Elena's recent job struggles, her mounting debts, he knew more about her situation than she realized. The workshop felt like a crucible, ready to forge the truth from layers of deception. Elena's initial defiance began to crumble. The carefully constructed persona of the aggressive, unapproachable neighbor started to reveal the desperate person beneath. Trapped physically in the workshop, she was also trapped by the weight of her own actions. "You don't understand," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "You have no idea what it's like to be." But Michael interrupted. "To be what?" "A thief. Someone who steals from a neighbor." The confrontation was just beginning. The locked workshop would become the stage for a transformation neither of them could have anticipated, a crucible that would reshape both of their lives in unexpected ways. Outside, the night grew darker, the workshop windows revealing nothing of the intense human drama unfolding within. The workshop's silence grew heavy with unspoken tensions. Elena's earlier bravado had completely dissolved, replaced by a vulnerability that seemed to shrink her physical presence. Michael watched her carefully, decades of working with wood having taught him to read subtle shifts and tensions. "I lost my teaching job 6 months ago," Elena finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Budget cuts at the community college. One moment I was a full-time instructor in their adult education program, and the next, nothing." Michael knew about economic challenges. His own father had struggled during recession years, but he had never resorted to theft. It's something in Elena's tone stopped him from immediately judging. She continued, her story unfolding like wood grain, revealing its hidden patterns. The job loss had been more than just financial. It was a devastating blow to her identity. Elena had been passionate about teaching English as a second language, helping immigrants and first-generation students navigate both language and cultural challenges. "The bills started piling up," she explained, her fingers tracing an old wood chisel on Michael's workbench. "My mother's medical treatments, the mortgage, credit card debt. I had some savings, but they disappeared faster than I could have imagined." Michael learned about her mother's chronic illness, the expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. Elena had been her primary caregiver, shuttling between hospital visits and increasingly desperate job hunting. The teaching position she once easily secured had become scarce, with younger, more digitally savvy instructors taking precedence. The tool thefts weren't random. They were calculated attempts to generate quick cash. The vintage woodworking tools, with their potential collector's value, represented a lifeline in her mind. Each tool she considered selling was another month of medical treatments, another chance to keep her mother alive. "I never wanted to become this person," Elena said, her eyes filling with tears. "My entire life, I've worked hard, taught students who others had given up on, helped my mother survive when my father walked away, and then suddenly, everything just fell apart." Michael recognized something in her story. Not justification for theft, but the complex desperation that could drive a person to make impossible choices. His grandfather's immigration story wasn't so different. Generations of survival, of doing whatever was necessary to keep family together. The lot workshop no longer felt like an interrogation room. It had transformed into a space of unexpected intimacy, where two neighbors, previously divided by suspicion and anger, were seeing each other's humanity. "Why my tools?" Michael asked, not accusatorily, but with genuine curiosity. Elena explained the underground market for vintage woodworking tools. Collectors would pay significant amounts for well-maintained pieces, especially those with historical significance. Michael's collection, carefully preserved and meticulously maintained, represented a small fortune to someone desperate enough to take the risk. As she spoke, Michael began to understand the complex web of circumstances that had led her to this moment. Desperation wasn't a simple emotion. It was a landscape as intricate and layered as the finest piece of crafted wood. The confrontation was shifting. What had begun as an act of potential revenge was becoming something else entirely, a moment of potential understanding, of seeing beyond surface judgments to the complicated human story beneath. Outside the workshop, the night continued its silent vigil, witnessing a transformation neither Michael nor Elena could have anticipated. The first rays of morning light filtered through the workshop windows, casting a soft glow on two figures who had spent the entire night talking. Michael and Elena looked exhausted but different. The walls of hostility had crumbled, replaced by something more complex and human. Maria Reyes arrived mid-morning, bringing coffee and a perspective Michael knew would be critical. A social worker by profession, she listened carefully to Elena's story, her professional training tempering Michael's initial anger with compassion. "I have connections," Maria said finally. "The adult education program at the community college is restructuring. They're looking for part-time instructors and program coordinators, and I know several local businesses that need someone with your communication skills." Elena's job search had been a months-long exercise in frustration. Each rejection had chipped away at her confidence, pushing her closer to the desperate actions that had brought her to this moment. Now, unexpectedly, a lifeline was being extended. Michael surprised both women with his next proposal. "Your mother's medical bills," he said carefully. "I have a friend who works in medical billing. He might be able to help you navigate some assistance programs." The path to resolution wasn't straightforward. There would be legal consequences for the theft, but Michael decided to approach this differently. Instead of pressing full criminal charges, he worked with local law enforcement to create a restorative justice agreement. Elena would work to repay the value of the stolen tools, not through monetary compensation, but through genuine labor and skill development. His workshop became an unexpected classroom. Elena would learn woodworking, understanding the true value of craftsmanship, not just in monetary terms, but in the dedication and skill required to transform raw materials into something beautiful and functional. Each tool became a lesson, each piece of wood a story waiting to be told. The local woodworking community watched this transformation with a mixture of skepticism and growing respect. Jack Peterson, who had known Michael for years, was particularly impressed. "You're giving her a chance to rebuild," he observed during one of their weekly meetups. "Not just her career, but her sense of self-respect." Michael thought about his grandfather's tools, the very items that had been stolen. They had always been more than just instruments of work. They were a legacy, a connection to family history and immigrant struggle. Now they would become instruments of redemption. Alima's mother, learning about her daughter's situation, was initially devastated. But as she saw Elena's commitment to making things right, attending night classes, working in Michael's workshop, slowly rebuilding her professional reputation, her initial shame transformed into cautious pride. 6 months into the agreement, something unexpected happened. Elena discovered a genuine passion for woodworking. Her background in teaching translated perfectly into learning a craft that required patience, precision, and storytelling. The same skills that had made her an exceptional language instructor now helped her understand the language of wood and tools. Michael watched her work one afternoon, seeing how carefully she measured, how meticulously she aligned a dovetail joint. The hands that had once stolen his tools now created something beautiful and meaningful. "Your grandfather would have liked this," Elena said one day, holding a piece of cherry wood she was carefully shaping. Michael realized she had learned more than just woodworking. She had learned about respect, about second chances, about the intricate ways human connections can be rebuilt. The neighborhood that had once whispered about conflict now spoke about transformation. A simple act of confrontation had become something more, a testament to understanding, to the possibility of redemption. As the sun set on Michael's workshop, the vintage tools gleamed, not as objects of contention, but as witnesses to a story of unexpected grace.